All right. Hello and welcome everyone to another episode of Letter of Law Interviews. My name is Sarthak Bhardwaj, and in the 11th episode of this interview series, I'm absolutely delighted, thrilled, and extremely honored to be in conversation with Professor Dr. N.S. Nigam Nuggehalli. Uh, I'm so sorry if I got the pronunciation of the name wrong, sir. I know you've just
Perfect.
told me
Perfect.
a few minutes before recording, but I don't want to get that wrong.
You did much better than most people, so don't worry about it.
Thank you so much, sir. So, Professor has been someone that's quite popular on social media these days for writing his very famous and inspiring letters to law students. And Sir is presently the dean of the BML Munjal School of Law. Before that, Sir has been associated with the Azim Premji University and the National Law School, Bangalore. NLS Bangalore is also where Sir finished his undergraduate degree in law before moving on to New York University for an LLM and a DPhil at Oxford eventually. That's not the entirety of Sir's academic and professional achievements, but if I start enumerating all of them here, perhaps that would take the entirety of the episode. So I'm hoping we'll get to talk more about Sir's own journey in the course of the episode. Before moving forward, Sir, thank you so much for taking the time out and being here with me.
My pleasure. My pleasure. It's great to be here talking to you. And I'm sure we'll have an interesting conversation on the areas that you mentioned, legal education, and not just the how it is today, but also the future of legal education in India. So I look forward to it.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, sir. So, sir, to start this off, why don't you talk to us a little bit about yourself? A few days ago, I was reading your article in NLS Quirk, where you had written about your moot court experience with Vikram Raghavan and Menaka Guruswamy. So, perhaps if you could talk to us about your experience in law school. And another area that I was really fascinated about was that you were also admitted to the New York bar, and for so many students that I know who wish to eventually move abroad to practice, that's sort of like a dream. So, what made you choose academia over legal practice? So, if you could just talk to us about that.
Yeah, look, I was the fifth batch of the National Law School Bangalore, which in those years, it's difficult to imagine the kind of fervor law school admissions brings to the fore today. So we had I don't know, probably about 800 students applying for the law school in 1992, and we had one center where this law school was held, and I had to ask for directions from various people to get to Nagar Bhavi in Bangalore. And it was an interesting time. It was an experiment. We were part of that experiment of professional legal education in the liberal arts era. So they combined BA and LLB, which wasn't the case before, and they made it a 5-year integrated course. Interesting experiment by Professor Madhav Menon. We were all part of it. And I think in some ways, because we were one of the pioneering batches, the first few batches of the law school, we were as much invested in what's going to happen as the people who organized the courses. I had a great time. It was a rigorous course. I had a great time in navigating through law school. I've written about that in Quirk a little bit, but also I don't know if you remember, I wrote something on Teachers' Day in September about the teachers that inspired me, and two of them came from the National Law School Bangalore, and the other one was from Oxford, and they were really great teachers who worked hard without any tangible benefit to themselves. They were really concerned and invested in their students' futures and in legal education. So it was a good time. The only thing that peculiar thing that happened, I suppose, I mean, it's not very peculiar now, but when I graduated, was that I left India immediately after graduation. So I went and I had a roundabout route. I went to Canada first for a year, did some research there. Then I went to NYU for my tax LLM. I was the first person actually from India to
Oh,
do a
wow.
tax LLM at NYU. And then I joined a law firm in New York. I was working there for a few years. And then I came back to India to teach for a little bit and then went back to Oxford and London for several years. And by the time I actually made my way back to India, it was about 16 years that I spent abroad. And when I went, and I had never really, I mean, I had on and off done work in India, but I had never really worked full time in India. So this was an opportunity for me in 2014 when I came to Azim Premji University and then later on National Law School to kind of really work in the Indian legal education space full time after a long time. And then I I landed up and founded in Gurgaon and founded the law school at BML Munjal University, which is sponsored by the Hero Group. So that's my journey in a nutshell. And I suppose there are several strands in that journey that could be discussed or that have different interesting incidents in them, as you will see in some of my letters.
Yeah.
Law schools.
Right. Before I move on to the next question, a very interesting aspect that I'd like to mention to my viewers. Back when I was in law school, memorials were actually handwritten and then professionally typed. So if you're wondering how all of that went about, I link an article Sir wrote for the NLS Quirk. So be sure to check that out. So moving on.
Not just the memorials, Sarthak, everything was handwritten. So,
oh, wow.
NLS has a system which still persists to this day of having regular, what they call project assignments in every trimester. NLS is a trimester system. So you end up writing these essays every 6 weeks in law school. Right? Every 6 weeks, you'll have to write a couple of essays.
Right.
And, people from your generation find it hard to believe, but all that had to be handwritten. So it was quite, even I can't imagine now doing it so many years down the line, but I had to actually handwrite, those 5,000 word essays over 5 years. Only the last year, I remember, we started using a computer at that time.
Wow, that's just so unimaginable to me. And I'm sure to so many other law students who are watching this right now. So diving straight right into the conversation, the very first question that I have for you, sir, given the fact that you are someone who has studied and taught at some of the leading universities across the country, you've taught it across the country and the world. You've taught in London, now here in India. So clearly, I'm sure you're aware of the wide gaps that exist between the quality of legal education across law schools here in India. So given the fact that you are in a process of establishing an emerging new law school, how do you think what's colloquially called, quote unquote, tier 2 law schools can develop the skills in their students when they don't really have an access to a stellar faculty? Some of the best students aren't going to school here. So in this sense, how can students from these universities at the end of their 5-year or 3-year legal education develop skills which are equivalent to their peers in other top law schools, so to speak?
Right, Sarthak. I think, I want to answer that question of yours, which I think is a critical question for private law schools in India. Because in India, the NLUs hold a central place in students' imaginations, right? And private law schools are yet to make the kind of mark that they ought to have been made a long time ago. Right? And there are a number of reasons for it. And I'll just state 2 reasons here. And I think when I do that, I think I will deviate a little bit from the paradigms or structures that you just gave me, because those are the paradigms or structures that I'm trying to challenge. Right? So let me explain to you what I mean. First, you talked about stellar law faculty. Right? For me, and that's critical, it's important that we need to have stellar law faculty. But what do we mean by star law faculty is a question for us, right? Clearly, we are interested in faculty who are scholars. Because if you're not a scholar, if you're not able to bring to the subject a certain depth of imagination and creativity and doctrinal knowledge, you can't expect the students to gain from it, right? So we understand that. Everyone is on par with that. But that is not the only thing that makes a star faculty, right? I mean, I want I want to get away from this American model in some ways, which thinks of staff faculty as a faculty that publishes a number of high quality work, which I believe is quite important. But that is not, that can't be the only definition of that. In fact, should not be. It's not a sufficient definition of a staff faculty. For us, for me, a stellar faculty is somebody who's deeply interested in his or her student and his or her student experience. The idea is that he may have a lot of concepts in his mind, a lot of scholarship in his work, but he has to be able to transmit and communicate that to students and inspire them to look at the work critically. Unless he or she does that, that faculty is of no use to law schools in India, where, as we know, it's the undergrad education that's important, right? Where we know that we have students get into law most of the time. Students get into law right after high school, right? So, and I have some thoughts about that as well, which I'll talk about later, but I'm not sure that's exactly the right way to go about it. But right now, that's how it is, right? Right now, you're done with your school, and the vast majority of our law students are undergraduate law students, right? They need a fantastic, invested, personalized student experience, right? And that student experience can only be given by somebody who's committed to the task of teaching as much as he or she is committed to the task of research. And and I think, in my opinion, there are lots of these stellar law faculty outside of NLUs as well. Right? They may not have the best publications, but they have the ability to inspire students to think critically. Right? So that's one thing. So I think what's lacking, if something is lacking, for me, that's lacking. We need to find people who can provide a great classroom experience in and outside the classroom as well, but mainly classroom experience to our students, so that they're able to understand that learning the law is something exciting, and they can be passionate about it. Right? This is very important for me, because I have law professors in the US who mumble through their class sessions, right? And they may have written several books, but that's not really how they're going to build a law school in India. That's not how we can build a law school. So that's one. The second thing, Sarthak, and this is also, in my opinion, very critical, is that a lot of this kind of tier 1, tier 2 so-called divide, in my opinion, is in the minds of the students. I think that the reason why an institution which is set up as a national law school is able to do better is because their students have a great peer experience, right? They see their classmates doing well, their classmates being very confident, going to moot courts, talking to people, and they think, and that has kind of a little bit of an osmosis effect, and there's a bit of a mindset change when somebody goes into that kind of class, and that is missing a little bit in the so-called tier 2 schools. And I think that mindset change has to happen, and that again has to be done by the faculty. Right? So I always tell my students that it's all in your mind, really. I mean, you're a person. Remember, again, coming back to my earlier point, you're undergrads. All you had the benefit of is high school education in India, and we know how high school education in India is. It's very standardized. It's very standardized. There's no great uplift just because you're going to one school or the other. So you go into law school pretty much on a level playing field. And so if you're less confident, or if you think you're not able to do as well as an NLU person, it's because it's in your mind. Right? It's not because of any kind of prior education. You've all read the same textbooks before you came to class. It's because of the way you think. You think that you're not, you and your peers. It's a peer effect, really. You and your peers think that you're not as proficient in whatever, in the legal language or in how you analyze things as somebody from an NLU would be. And that's a mindset change we'll have to do. And that mindset change will occur when people start doing tangible things. So I always push, I'm sure that you are also of the same opinion, I push my first year law students right from the beginning, first day of class. I tell them, you can complain as much as you want, but I'm just going to push you to do work harder than what you can ever imagine you'll work harder. I'll tell the parents as well. So whenever I meet a parent, in my law school, I tell the parent, in about a month from now, you're going to receive a phone call from your child complaining about law. Ignore him or ignore her. This is what I tell the parents. I said, please ignore this phone call, because otherwise they are not going to be learning anything that I want them to learn, right? And I'm and our law students inevitably, some of our law students inevitably do as well as anybody else would, right? When they at a very early time in their career. So it's stellar faculty for me is a faculty who provides a great teaching experience in addition to scholarship. Scholarship is non-negotiable, but that's not sufficient. It has to be a great teaching experience, and second, a mindset change in the students. That's critical for me.
Those are some very interesting points, sir. And just building on that, you said how a stellar faculty for you is not someone who merely produces scholarship, but also provides an extremely good teaching experience. So on that topic, sir, a criticism of professors, legal professors in India that I've often come across is that their experiences are often devoid of the practical realities. A few months ago, we had a guest lecture in our college by a judge from the Delhi High Court who said, whatever you don't learn in law school is important in court. So in this sense, do you think that people who eventually move to the academia, or students who want to eventually teach the law, should all of them be required to at least practice law for a bit before moving to academia to give this teaching experience, a practical teaching experience? Or is that not required and the present system can be refined to meet all of these criticisms, if at all it's a fair criticism?
It's a bit of a fair criticism. I'll admit that. I would, in fact, my personal opinion is that some amount of experience is always good for a law teacher. Some amount of legal experience is always good for a law teacher. It doesn't have to be directly correlated to what they're teaching. It's just that you get a sense of what it means to see the law, observe the law in practice. And that sense you can transmit to your students. It doesn't have to be subject specific at all. But I think some amount of practical experience is very useful, either full-time practical experience or consulting experience. But some amount of real-world experience for the teachers is, I think, very useful. But again, Sarthak, sometimes too much is made out of this, right? What's really important, I think, is that the teacher is enthusiastic about his or her subject, right? And wants to really energize the students and make them think about ideas in the law. A lot of these teachers about whom students complain that they don't have practical experience, or they're teaching irrelevant things, or what they're teaching is not really giving me a sense of what happens in practice, are actually disguised complaints about a teacher who's indifferent to teaching, who is not able to, who's not really, he was a kind of dead job for him. You know, he or she is not really interested in. It's a beautiful, complicated, challenging, but ultimately very, very good profession. So that non-enthusiasm of the teacher sometimes gets translated into this idea that what he or she is doing is not relevant. So I think that issue is overstated a little bit. But I agree. I mean, I agree partially with that, with the respected High Court judge, that it's important that people have some good real-world experience in order to ensure that they get a sense when they talk to the students. They talk in a pragmatic manner, right? Law is ultimately, there's a lot of pragmatism involved in law, and they're able to understand what that means, right? And they also understand. Sorry, I'm taking a little bit of your time.
No, please go ahead. Please go ahead.
Law is interconnected, right?
Yeah.
So, IBC is in the news. The Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code is in the news, but actually, a lot of issues in Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code are kind of your bread and butter contract issues, indemnities, guarantees, representations. What happens to these kind of things in an insolvency petition? And so they're interconnected, right? And somebody who's got a sense of the real world will be able to understand this better than someone who doesn't have it. So that's what I meant.
That's again a very interesting take on this, sir, and thank you so much for sharing. Now, moving on to some of the very interesting letters that you've written, and when we were talking about featuring you on the podcast, I started rereading all of them, and one really interesting aspect from a very recent letter you wrote was the fact that why law schools are important. You wrote about why the necessity of law schools is so important. But sir, just to get your take on this issue, there are so many law schools across the country, and every month or so we hear the news of some new law school springing up in some part of the country, which in my view, don't really have the necessary skills or the faculty or the peer group required to actually form the kind of law schools that we imagine. So, in this sense, sir, given the fact that the quality of legal education is unequal across the spectrum of colleges in India, should there also not be an option for students who don't get into a college which can actually do good for them to not go to law school at all and instead choose an apprenticeship model and learn the practical skills from a mentor or a lawyer?
Yeah, I think we could explore the UK model. I mean, the model you're talking about is already there in some sense in the United Kingdom, where you have an apprenticeship model. But of course, I think as an option, it should be available to everyone. So I agree with you on that. But you miss out on certain things if you go down that route, and I think people should be aware of that. So and therefore make a choice knowing that that's what they miss out on. You miss out on a great liberal arts education, right? You miss out on the fact that you're able to understand political science. You're able to read Rousseau, Hobbes, and Locke. And some people may be interested. I'm interested in it, and I'm sure some other people are interested in it. They're interested in exploring issues of this sort as part of their law school curriculum, not just independently. They want to know why law is important to the Indian Constitution, and to kind of make that connection, it'll be great for them to have gone through a political science course and a law course, right? And that kind of stuff you miss, I think, just because you don't have time to do it. If you go through the apprenticeship system, but of course, some people may say, "Look, I'll be an apprentice, but I'll also study Locke, Rousseau on my own time. I don't need to be taught that." And that's possible as well. So as I said, I think students can be given a choice. The other thing, Sarthak, is that again, undergrad students more than graduate students. Undergrad students sometimes are transformed not just in terms of the knowledge, but also in terms of their attitudes when they go to law school. It happened to me, and I'm sure it happened to other people as well. And that attitudinal change, how to manage the resources you have in order to be able to study something for a great length of time, or how to make connections between various domains of thought, and how to do that in a way that's critical, precise, and clear. These are kind of things that I think you pick up in a law school 3-year or 5-year degree. It may be more difficult to pick this up in an apprenticeship system. So that's the other thing, that those attitudinal changes, which are related to your intellectual growth, may not be ideally suited or may not ideally occur in an environment where you're working and learning at the same time. That's the only other thought I have.
Absolutely, and I agree with you, sir. And on the topic that sir mentioned, someone might be interested in knowing how some legal philosophers' work is important to the Constitution. Sir wrote a brilliant letter on why we should all study jurisprudence. So I'll be linking that as well in the description section. Be sure to check them all out. In fact, check all of the letters that sir has written. Believe me, you'll love all of them. So moving on, sir. Another really interesting point that I was reading in one of your letters was that you wrote about how law students should not wait for one activity to finish before moving on to another one. And I found that really interesting because right from the first year, what I've heard from my seniors and teachers is that, look, if you're doing a moot, don't try to write an article or a paper also simultaneously, or If your semesters are ongoing, don't try to go to court or try to intern. All of that's only going to cause a great deal of confusion in your mind. So what's your take on that? If you could please elaborate a bit on that, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
I think these activities feed into each other, right? I mean, if you do you're mooting and you're writing, sometimes what you're mooting about are areas in which you need to think really critically, right? And that will feed into your writing in that domain or in other domains. Similarly, if you're arranging a series of articles for your law review or you're editing articles for your law review, those are items or areas of scholarship that will have implications for your work and for your thinking in other areas. So these are not silos, they're all integrated. And that's the reason why I was encouraging students to not to restrict themselves to one activity or to wait until one activity is over. Having said that, Sarthak, it's for you to manage your time, right? It's for the student to manage your time. So I've seen, particularly in the National Law School where I was teaching, that sometimes moot courts play such a huge role in a student's lives, that their classroom experience, the attention to what's happening in the class is foreshadowed. I mean, they're not really focusing as much. They're not even looking at what they're studying in the regular courses because they're so focused on moot courts and other things. Now, part of the reason from the student's point of view is that the classes are not interesting. They're saying, look, I don't learn much from this class, and therefore I'm going to moot courts. And there may be a little bit of a grain of a truth in that, I think. But in an ideal situation, in a good law school, students must be taking their classroom experience as seriously as their extracurricular activities. It's for them to manage their time. And some of the advice you may be getting is about time management, not so much about activities, but about time management. Saying, look, if you're the kind of person who will be overwhelmed by your moot court work, then don't take on other things as well. So that it could be from the perspective of that time management idea that you must be getting. But if you leave that aside, if you're able to manage your time, doing more than one thing at the same time is always better, because it's all your thinking and your actions are integrated. Right? You're able to actually benefit from one activity in another activity.
That's actually a very, very good advice, and I'll try to inculcate it in my own journey through law school, well, whatever's left of it. And so moving on, you said some really interesting things in your answer. You said how a student might choose to focus more on his or her moot or article writing, given the fact that there's some grain of truth in the fact that the classes in law school aren't really as interesting as one would suppose them to be. So in this sense, do you think there should really be a compulsory attendance of 75%, or should students be allowed to do better things with their time? And if they're able to clear the exam at the end of the term, then so be it.
Yeah, I've struggled with that question actually. Sarthak, I'll give you two answers to your question. First is that, as you will soon find out, there are aspects of your life that are not going to be interesting at all. Right? And you'll have to just deal with it. I mean, I think I would say about 20% of whatever activities we do are going to be tedious. And as long as it's 20%, I think we're doing a great job. I think we're leading a good life. But there will be some tedious part. Just filing your tax returns, and from a tax lawyer's point of view, is very a tedious exercise. So you'll have that part of your life. When you start earning money, you'll have to file tax returns as well. So there'll be some part of your life that is aggravating, and you will have to that's just life. And I think some part of your classroom experience, I must say, you'll have to just say that I need it. I need to learn about FEMA. Foreign Exchange Management Act just drives me to tears, but I'll have to deal with it for the rest of my life. So let me just do it. Right? But your attendance question, I've struggled with it myself. So anyone who goes abroad knows that this is a very Indian thing. In the US and America, there's no attendance in law schools or in college. And so we had to ask ourselves this question: why are we still persisting with it? And the answer again has to do with the motivation levels of our undergraduate students. Graduate students, different approaches. Undergraduate students, if I don't if I don't put a student in a class, and if the student doesn't come to class at all, then that student is, how do we motivate him? How do we make that student do what we want him to do? Right? So a student is going to say, give me the choice. If your class is interesting, I'll come. If it's not, I'm not going to come. Now, the day he comes to my class, unfortunately, that class is not interesting. So he's going to stay away for the rest of the semester. Right? How is that going to serve my purpose and his purpose? Right? I mean, so especially when he's 17 or 18 or 19, right? When he's not at an age where something tedious doesn't bother him too much. So this is what I'm struggling with. My problem is my job of ensuring giving a great teaching experience to the student may not even happen if I say let's not have an attendance policy. The student just won't turn up, and then it's going to be a problem for both of us. So I would say there should be an attendance policy. We can quibble about the numbers, 75%, 60%. We can quibble about that. We can say maybe reduce it a little bit, make it a bit more. In fact, we have a harsher attendance policy at my law school. So,
wow. How much is it?
So in fact, they lose a grade if they fall below 75.
Wow.
And so I'm perhaps the wrong person to be talking about this. but we can have a discussion about it. We can say, look, listen, I think that the attendance requirements are very high, but I don't think we can at this point of time do away with the attendance requirement itself, because I don't see how in our conditions that we are in, with our students who have got various variable motivational levels, how do we make them? How do we do our job as teachers if they don't come to class?
That's actually that actually gives me a lot to think about, and I'm sure our viewers will feel the same way. Moving on to one of the final sets of questions, because we're running short of time, is about legal academia, sir. I know many friends in my law school and all over the country, students who want to eventually go into teaching and want to become a professor in law. But one thing that I've seen my peers get dissuaded from is the fact that they feel that, look, if I'll probably go abroad for an LLM, it's going to cost me. Chances are I might not get a very good scholarship, so I'll have to pay the fees out of my own pocket. And who knows if I get a teaching job abroad or not, and eventually I might have to come back. And in India, legal academia doesn't pay that well yet, especially in proportion to the amount you have invested in your graduate studies, LLM and PhD and whatnot. Of course, it's changing with the onset of some new private law schools, but largely I think the trend remains the same. So in this sense, someone who wants to join the legal academia, someone who's still a student and is being dissuaded by some of these concerns, what would you say to him or her?
I think the legal academy in India pays decently. After the 7th Pay Commission for NLUs and then private colleges, it's a decent wage. You're not going to be earning astronomical investment banker, law firm salaries, but that's a trade-off that people have to make. You're not going to be earning, salaries that will lead you to keep worrying about money. That's not the situation in India anymore, in any law school, any good law school. So I think from that perspective, there's a trade-off. I mean, I think people who join the academia are likely to fly economy for the rest of their lives, but that's okay. I mean, people do trade-offs. I mean, it's some people want to fly business, and then they shouldn't be into academia in the first place.
Sure.
But academia gives you an enormous amount of satisfaction, job satisfaction, both in terms of the work that you do as a law teacher, your teaching and your research, but also in terms of the relationships that you build with your students, and the kind of close, inspiring relationships that you can build in academia has no parallel anywhere in any other profession. Right? So those are the trade-offs that a person should look into. I hope the young people reading this, listening to this, are able to appreciate the fact that um, as long as any job, academia is just an example here, but any job that they're doing, as long as it pays a decent amount, right, they shouldn't be worried about that. Should not be the sole motivation for accepting or rejecting that position, because what's important ultimately would be how you're enjoying your work, you know, as long as the money is decent.
Yeah.
So a lot of these people who go into busy legal practices or other very high-paying jobs, I feel sometimes only down the line realize that, you know, money's okay, but I don't know how much enjoyment I'm getting out of what I'm doing. So I think that's an important thing that people should. I think job satisfaction is and work-life balance, but see, work-life balance is something. It's an overrated word. So I mean, there's no work-life balance for an academic either. We keep working,
Yeah.
but job satisfaction is critical. Is very important, and I think sometimes that takes a back seat for young people, right? Because they're more focused on what's the pot of gold at the end of the. And I think it's important that they realize that in the end, realize from other people's bitter experiences that in the end, job satisfaction is the most important.
That's a great answer. Thank you so much for sharing that, sir. And now moving on to the, I think, which can be the final question for today's meeting. You have written a lot about the importance of writing and reading in your letters, sir. So perhaps in the concluding bit of our conversation, if you could give some book recommendations or anything, some articles that you think students should read, anything at all. I know you've already written about it, but perhaps a little bit more than that.
I hope you're not going to. I mean, I'm wary of giving book recommendations because people invariably give very boring book recommendations. And so I'm wary of doing it. Let me tell you, in the law, anything written by Ronald Dworkin makes for great, interesting reading, right? Particularly Taking Rights Seriously and Law's Empire. Right? These are really interesting, thoughtful, provocative, unorthodox, but essentially readings that will challenge the way you think about the law. Right? So some of the things some of the stuff that I've thought about have all come because of the fact that reading Dworkin has led me to rethink many of my concepts. So in the area of law, if you're asking me anything written by Ronald Dworkin would be great, but then I'll be accused by you and your peer group of again giving you all kind of boring book recommendations. So let me tell you that I'm reading other books as well, which might be interesting. Actually, I'm reading a very interesting book right now called Educated.
Oh, I read that one.
Right? Okay. So it's a great.
Beautiful. It's beautiful.
Book, right? I hope I get an opportunity to write about it actually in one of my letters.
Wow.
It's a great book to read for law students. Right? It's important for law students to understand how people from different backgrounds can come and do things differently. And it's an amazing book, I think, for people to understand. I'm also reading something unusual because when I said this, I met some young people. As you know, I like meeting young people. So I met some young people and I told them Game of Thrones is a great thing. And they said, yes, absolutely, sir. That's great. I said, yeah. I mean, when I read it, I loved the sentence construction and the plot development. And they were like, hold on a second. Did you say when you read it? I said, yes. What do you mean when you read it? I said, it's a book. Actually, there are 5 volumes of Game of Thrones. I read. I said, the youngsters were shocked. They were like, no, listen, we are talking about the show. No, don't tell us you haven't seen the show yet. So I said, no, I have not seen the show. I probably should see it, but I have not seen it. But the book itself, I think the books are also very light but very good reading. I mean, it's well plotted and great fantasy literature. So that's what I'm doing when I'm not reading Lost Empire. I'm reading about other kinds of empires.
What's happening in Westeros? That's actually interesting, and I agree with the Game of Thrones book thing because I've read all of the books, and I'm still waiting for Georgie to write the final series. And give some closure to the absolutely abhorrent ending that the creators of the show did. But anyway, that's an entirely different.
You're done both. You read the books and you see the
Yes,
show.
I watched the series after
Which
reading
one
the
came
books.
first? So okay, that's what I want to ask you.
Yes. So that actually gave me a lot of reason to not like the series. But anyway, that's a discussion for another time. I think for now, we can wrap this conversation up. Professor Nigam, thank you so much for taking the time out and talking with me. Thank you so much for also writing all of those really, really interesting and inspiring letters to all of us. I look forward to them, and I can't wait to read the next one as soon as it comes out. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you very much, Sarthak, and thank you for inviting me. And I had an absolutely great time chatting with you. And best of luck for your series. And hope that you and everybody else who is in this conversation found it interesting.
Thank you so much, sir.